My name is Adam Christou, and I am joined now with Luke Miller, lead organiser of the Melbourne Queer Games Festival, for a bit of a chat about what that all means and what is the Melbourne Queer Games Festival. So thank you, Luke, for coming onto the show.
My pleasure. Hello, viewers.
Yeah, let's start with the bare bones basics and maybe have a little bit of a talk about the history of the Melbourne Queer Games Festival. So, how long has it been running for? How did it find its feet? How did it launch?
Sure. Well, we're a sort of very volunteer-driven, very lo-fi queer games festival. We've been running for 4 years. We're part of International Games Week, in early October in Melbourne. Um, and basically, we open submissions early in the year, saying send us your queer games. And then a couple of months before the festival, we close submissions, and then we play through all the games, and we guss them up and put them in a bit of a showcase. And then as sort of features roll in, we roll them out. Depending on, every year it's slightly different. And yeah, it's just really people who love queer games seeking them out. I guess for me, my path to it is that growing up, there's just no queer characters really well, for me, gay characters in any of the TV or books that I consumed, and especially not the computer games. And just, I've always felt that there's a shelf, an empty shelf where these games should be. And so I guess just as an adult, I've got a bit of a passion for, seeking them out and trying to fill that shelf in a bit. And, yeah, so I guess it's sort of come from people who love queer games and then have been making them and then sort of seeing there's not enough space for them and just going, well, you have to make your own space. So yeah, it's a really sort of lovely festival, and it's very international. It's the Melbourne Queer Games Festival, but it's for the whole planet really.
You mentioned that it's kind of volunteer driven. How does that whole process work, and what are some of the challenges that come about with a volunteer team putting together a festival like this?
Well, people come and go. I guess is probably a big part of a volunteer. I mean, it's not a million different, a million miles away from a queer film festival or a community radio. You've just got people who um, just love the scene, and it is obviously it's a lot of queer developers are involved, but it just yeah, it comes and goes. And some years we have like a different features depending on what people are interested in, and some year we have playthroughs, and some years we have a sort of a little archival component to it if someone's interested in doing that sort of research. So it is kind of what people make it, but it's first and foremost about just sort of taking these queer games and just sort of holding them up and going, look at this shiny thing, and you should all pay attention to it.
I think what I love about this festival is there's lots of diamonds in the rough. There's lots of very experimental games that take the idea of queer from beyond just having LGBTI themes to or characters into the idea of queering what the concept of narrative is or what gameplay is. Do you feel like that's an integral part of this festival as well?
Yes, you nailed it 100%. Like I do feel like a big interest in the festival, especially for gamers, is there's just an intensity and an honesty to these games that you just don't really think of honestly when you play a lot of games. And you know, I came into this with I guess a lot of anger and passion about that lacking representation, and really being gay man really wanting to see gay characters, but just I guess a lot of the growth for me, or the thing that's sort of blindsided me a lot over the years, is actually it's the stories that you wouldn't think, the games that you wouldn't think are in your little Venn diagram of what you want, that really are the ones that get through to you and make you go, actually, this is really interesting. This is actually really dynamic and special.
So that I guess that's a perfect jumping point to ask you a little bit about some of this year's programming. There are 57 games that are being showcased. What are some of the ones that have really shone through for you, that have really stood out from that submissions process, that you've gone, wow, this is something I've never seen before, or what it's doing with this particular storytelling is unique.
Well, I mean, where do you begin with that, really? So I do think at the festival we get broadly three types of games. We do get that LGBT attraction type of side. So we get games about what it is to be gay or to be lesbian, and so a lot of little love stories, very narrative driven, or a lot of like growing up in a small town and things are a bit tough, those kind of games. And then we do get a lot of sort of political activist games, which are a bit what is it, what is queer politics? What's how does that interplay with capitalism, or how does it play with you know institutions and rituals like marriage? And then we have that third type of game about what is queer, as in alternative and other, and I guess I have a soft spot for those really sort of glitchy, trashy kind of games a bit. And this year's kind of no exception. We've got a really broad range of games. So we do have a lot of sort of narrative driven ones that you might expect. So like Minotaur Hotel is kind of quite popular this year, which is where you take over a rundown hotel, and at the heart of it is a really handsome Minotaur, and it's kind of this um, it sort of draws on that Greek heritage kind of thing, but there's a lot of, I guess, sort of gay themes to it, which you might, which is always cute and everything. And then we've got quite a few political games. We've got a couple of entries from France this year, which has got a quite nice flavor. And so, for example, one I think is called Traces, where it's set in a library doing an exhibit on HIV. And basically, the game is you walk around to the different shelves, like the art section, the history section, the graphic novel section, and it tells you about great works about HIV in those different sections, which is that's interesting on a couple of levels because it's not just about that sort of queer activist thing, but it's also I think kind of a trend of the COVID era of sort of um, digitization of offline spaces. So recreating a library and then putting real artifacts in it is kind of a thing we've all had to sort of do a bit as creatives a bit the last 18 months. And then that third game, and we've got another political game where you're walking around a pride march, just talking to people at the pride march, and they each give you their own opinion on what pride means, which is a trend. Like I don't know about you, but over the whole time you've been in the scene, people are always asking themselves, what is pride? And, is it still current? And is it inclusive or is it excluding people now? And, those sort of questions crop up. And I think in like mainstream media, the way that's dealt with can be very simplistic, but really inside the queer community and then inside a computer game, you really start to get down to the nuance of it. And that's the kind of stuff that I really love. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so interesting you describe those almost three different streams of games that make up the festival in a big way, because I think my big takeaway this year was, like, once again, big showing from visual novels and kind of interactive romance themed novels, which, as you've mentioned, must just play into the desire to see queer romances actually represented within media, and in some ways queer erotic romances as well. I think that that's another thing that we don't get to see that often, which is why I think a lot of queer visual novels tend to kind of explore a kind of an erotic gaze as well. Do you think that that's a really important element to have within the festival?
Oh, 100%. 100%. One way I've heard it put is that one person's erotic game or erotic thing is another person's exploring their sexuality, and um, absolutely a big part of the festival is we're a sex positive festival, and we really just sort of want to say there is no shame at all in just being a sexual being. I don't know, it sounds a bit twee or a bit strange to say it out loud, but you know, we really do sort of say come one, come all a bit. Well, actually, no pun intended, but yeah. But due to the visual novel thing, I think, um, you know, games can be very sort of mechanically driven and actually have a very high technical input. But where a visual novel, for example, is very narrative driven, and if you do have a story you want to tell, it's a very great format for that. The entry cost technically is a bit lower. Uh, yeah, and so I think there's a lot of reasons we get the visual novels for sure.
Yeah, I thought that might be another element as well, which is that there is a degree of accessibility that goes into creating or programming a visual novel, or say a game on Twine, that allows it to be accessible to so many people that might not come from traditional games dev backgrounds, or might be kind of queer artists that want to explore this different field. And so it kind of makes sense that we would see a lot of these stories kind of represented through that particular style.
For sure. But we do, for the festival, we do get these occasional games, and this is about those diamonds in the rough, where a lot of the time it's about, so a lot of the games, and it's something I really admire as a sometime dev myself, is being able to take one thing and just do that one thing. Like I have that kitchen sink approach, just throw everything in it kind of thing. But we get these little games. A lot of the games in the festival are 5 to 10 minutes to play, so they're very accessible in that regard. The games that come in that play with the mechanics, and you don't see that in mainstream games. So we had one a few years ago, which is it's called like Star-Crossed Lovers, I believe, and it's two guys on a date. Sort of, they're sitting on the hood of the car, staring up the stars, and you kind of got to guide their gaze through the star maze. And it was like romantic and gameplay mechanic together, and just when the thing that that your interaction with the game is overlaying with the themes of the game, to me that's when computer games actually sort of elevate above films and books as an art form. So yeah,
Hmm.
we get very excited when those come in. Yeah, we have and I love those ones that just really capture an experience. Another one this year is Anxiety at the Disco, which is a great name for a game if you're familiar with Panic at the Disco. And it's a platformer, but there's no villains. It's just kind of, you've got to get out of this club because you're feeling anxious, and so just having to go through the crowds of people is what does the damage. And it's simple, it's short, but it just really captures a kind of a feeling.
Hmm. So where can people go if they want to play these games, find out about them, and look through the shortlist for this
Sure,
year?
sure. Well, our festival is part of Melbourne International Games Week, but we do roll out the stuff as it comes in. And so the showcase is rolled out now over the last 2 weeks. And so all 57 games are up on our website, and you just sort of follow it through to the webpage for that game. And most of them are free to play, even though queer developers should value their work and charge more for it. And of half of them are playable in the browser. So if you're not a gamer, it really is a great onboard onboard ramp for gaming. But if you're, a hardcore gamer, but you're a little bit bored of mainstream games, it really is, you know, they're lumpy and they're rough. But as I said, they've got this intensity and honesty to it that I think will really grab you.
Hmm. And finally, one thing that I thought was really great about the festival this year is that you've worked on creating an emerging developer award as well, with a cash prize to of 500 US. How did that come about? And was this a long term goal for the festival to eventually be able to offer something like this?
Absolutely. Big inspiration for us is the Melbourne Queer Film Festival, and they have a little side program of trying to, find the next generation of developers. And um, we chose an emergency developer rather than like a new developer or early in career, because you can be 20 or 100 and have done 2 games or 50 games and still be eligible, because when it's really, the question is, who do we want to see more from? And when you're looking at all these games sort of in context, you do kind of go, oh, this is so interesting. What is this person, or what are these people going to do next? And we just really wanted to kind of encourage it, and and put a bit of money into the scene. So I mean, that joke about indie dev, it's the same $20 being handed around from dev to dev. And yeah, it's a bit true here, but you were really thrilled to be able to put some hardcore cash on the table, and we get a lot of student games, and we're very proud of that. So
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Luke. It's been a pleasure talking with you. I'm excited to keep digging through all of the great games that are featured for this year for the Melbourne Queer Games Festival. So thank you again for coming on Sifter.
great, thanks for having us.